Hey, okay, grasshoppers. As promised, this lesson is going to be about decolonization in India. And I would like to remind you as I go through this that you will have a response at the end. If you can see, I'm moving my cursor, analyze the effects that decolonization had on modern India. I want that written in your journal, but I do not want it sent to me immediately. Some of you guys didn't seem to get the message on you're supposed to keep an online version of your journal. And then I'm going to ask for everybody to turn that in on May 18th. And then I'm going to grade that as your summative experience for everything that you've done since the World War II test. Okay. It's just the best way to do it. And it's the easiest way for me to just take a look at your journal responses all at once. So don't send me your journals individually on your own. Okay. Just when it's due on the 18th of May, I'll take them from everybody. That'll give me a day to grade them and figure out what your final score should be. So as we take a look at this, decolonization, we have to start with the concept of decolonization. So what is it? Decolonization is the idea of reversing the effects of imperialism. So back in November, December, early January, we talked about how Western powers in Europe and the United States went around the world essentially planting flags and claiming territory, right? A process known as colonizing other places. So it's part of the idea of imperialism. You know, we're a superior culture. We're going to go to other cultures that we consider less superior, plant our flags there, take them as colonies, take their resources, etc. You remember this. Well, after World War II, uh, like imperialism increasingly was looked down upon as negative. And a lot of these Western powers in the United States are going to leave these places that they had taken because they're going to see the wisdom of that for two reasons. Reason number one is after World War II, everybody doesn't have any money. And you're starting to realize that keeping a colony is more expensive than the benefits that you get from that. And so these countries are going to kind of back away and give up their colonies because it's just not worth it financially to hold on to them, to maintain an army presence there, et cetera, et cetera. And the other reason why all these Western powers are going to leave after World War II is because they're going to look like hypocrites. Not only did they already look like hypocrites for not leaving after World War I when they were talking up, you know, decolonization, or excuse me, they were talking up self-determination, right? And that became obvious that self-determination was only going to be a thing for Europe, okay, not for everybody else. But after World War II, when Western Europe had fought a war against Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan, it's going to look hypocritical to fight a war against people that we said were trying to establish empires against people's will, i.e. the Third Reich or the Japanese co-prosperity sphere. They were trying to do these things by force. And when they're defeated, now all these Western powers get to keep their colonies and keep people underneath their thumbs by force. It's going to look hypocritical. So nations like France, England, you know, are going to start backing away. They're going to start giving up their colonies, okay? Because it makes financial sense to do so, and it makes political sense now to do so. And so when we talk about the concept of decolonization, that's really what we're talking about, okay? So, but as time goes by after World War II, you know, the forces of globalization are going to take effect. And what I mean by that is the world's going to get smaller. Due to technological advances, we're going to be in contact with parts of the world more than we ever have before. I mean, me talking to you right now is a product of globalization, right? The technology has made it so that I can teach you guys from a distance. And if I can teach you from a distance here, I can teach you from a distance if you guys were all in a classroom in India. And so what happens is, as technology shrinks the world, capitalism takes advantage of that. And you're going to see here these multinational corporations as I move my cursor. These are corporations that can increasingly, as technology increases, can operate outside of borders. They don't, it's no longer necessary for a company inside of the United States to have to operate in a place that the U.S. controls in order for it to take advantage of economic opportunities there, And that's going to be true of England and France and other places too. You don't need to own India, for example, in order to use people in India as a labor source for your corporation. All you got to do is have that company establish a headquarters there or a factory there. And then you can employ the people without having to go there and like conquer territory and send troops and like establish an indirect rule there and all the stuff that we did under imperialism. You don't need to do that now because technology allows capitalism to operate without borders, okay? And there are good things and bad things to this, right? When multinational corporations go and employ people in places far away, I mean, it provides jobs, and some of those jobs are really good jobs for the people living there. But the reason why capitalism wants to go to places like India or China or Africa or South America is because the people there can work for less money. So what you're doing is if you're a place like England or the US, you're exporting jobs that could have employed people in England or the US, and you're sending them to places like India and China and Africa. And that means there are less jobs for the people in England and the US, right? You're destroying jobs in the home country to employ people far away because they're cheaper. And that is going to have implications for places in the West like England and the United States. And you're seeing that with, China today, who makes all of our medical equipment. So they now can call the shots in some ways. It's a product of decolonization, it's a product of globalization and multinational corporations. And so China now can have that leverage. Well, India can, doesn't have that quite a kind of leverage yet, but it has moved into the modern sphere by essentially the efforts of multinational corporations and by globalization, right? India has become a more modern place since the British left in 1947. So let's do a quick overview of the voices for self-determination. Some of these you might remember, and I taught you about all of them actually. And there's the difference between the unification and the two-state theory. Okay, this is what you guys need to realize because voices for self-determination in India come from people like Gandhi, okay, who I already taught you about. And another guy down here, if you scroll down, Jawaharlal Nehru. These guys were voices for Indian self-determination. And so is this third guy here, Muhammad Ali Jinnah. But they all wanted it in a different way, right? So Nehru and Gandhi were both members of the Indian National Congress. So I'm going to move my cursor here, the INC, or Indian National Congress, right? And that was a mostly Hindu organization that was pushing for the separation of India from England. But the fear was that because it was dominated by Hindus, the minority Muslim population in India, and if you remember, India has these two dominant religions, Hindus and Muslims, and there are many others there as well, but those are the biggest ones. And of those two, the vast majority of Hindus. And the fear was that men like Gandhi and Nehru, in pushing for independence, that's great, but it's going to be dominated by Hindus, and the Muslims are going to be oppressed as a result of this because they're a minority group. And so, I've got a quote here by Nehru on why India should be independent from Britain, and you guys can read that on your own. But, Muhammad Ali Jinnah saw the situation for what it was and said, look, unless we have a separate country that is just for Muslims, this isn't going to work because Muslims will be oppressed. otherwise. And so he is going to push for something known as the two-state solution. Okay, you're going to have an India, and then you're going to have a place for Muslims called Pakistan. Okay, and Muhammad Ali Jinnah, who is one of the leaders of something known as the Muslim League, here that I'm moving my cursor over, right? They're going to be looking to create a place for Muslims as a homeland called Pakistan. And the dividing of India into two as a result of this plan is going to be known as India's partition in 1947. Ultimately, Britain is going to get on board with Jinnah's plan that you need to have two countries. And I think partly Britain's going to do that because it's easiest. I mean, Great Britain is going to be really, really criticized for the way it handles India's partition, because for them it's going to be like, I'm gonna head out, because they want to leave, they want to get out. Once they have made the decision to give up on India as a colony, they want to do it as quickly as possible to save as much money as possible. And they're going to get very much criticized for how they do this, because when Britain agrees to the partition, the two-state theory, they're not going to really leave much infrastructure behind to make sure that this process happens peacefully and efficiently. Though Britain will leave behind a couple thousand soldiers to babysit this process, but it's not going to be enough. And as you look at this map of what's going to happen to India after 1947, first of all, I call attention to your pie graph on the bottom left, and it really shows you how many Hindus there are in India compared to the other religious groups. So when Britain calls it quits, and the process of people moving to the parts, to the two countries that have been created, when that starts to happen, it erupts in terrible violence, what we're going to call sectarian violence, which is religious violence between Hindus and Muslims, who we already know don't like each other. And now that Britain leaves, are going to kind of have at it. They're just going to be allowed to attack each other with impunity as they cross borders to get to where they're going. And a third major religious group here, known as the Sikhs, are also going to be involved in this violence. They'll be kind of caught in the middle, and they're gonna fight back, and there's gonna just be all kinds of killing, and millions of people are gonna die as a result of the partition of India, as refugees go from one place to the other where they're, quote, supposed to go. So, for example, looking at this map, if you are a Hindu living in West Pakistan, all of a sudden you find yourself in a foreign country called Pakistan. It's no longer India. So you have to move across that border back into India. And if you're a Muslim in India and you want to live with other Muslims, in order to not be just surrounded totally by Hindus, you're going to have to cross the border into Pakistan. And another problem created is that Pakistan is going to be split. There's going to be West Pakistan here, and there's going to be East Pakistan here, with the country of India right in the middle. So like Muslims are going to have to pick the direction they want to go and go there. And Hindus that live in those areas have got to, come back into India. And this is a mess. And Britain doesn't really leave a whole lot of a plan to do this or provide food or water for the people on the roads as they travel, and the railroads as they travel back and forth. And so people are going to starve. They're going to die of thirst. There's going to be a lot of disease, and there's going to be a lot of sectarian, brutal violence between the groups as they pass each other on the road. And so millions are going to die in this process that is ill thought out and result in some terrible things happening. After the partition is finalized, then in the 1970s, West Pakistan is going to go to war with East Pakistan, because East Pakistan, for obvious reasons, I mean, look at the geography, is going to want to separate from West Pakistan. And India is going to be on the side of East Pakistan in doing that. And so the civil war will take place, more violence that will result in East Pakistan becoming independent and changing its name to Bangladesh. This is the modern state of Bangladesh. And West Pakistan is just going to be known as Pakistan. Meanwhile, to the south here, Ceylon is going to achieve its independence. It'll be known as Sri Lanka, okay? And it'll have its own problems too that are beyond the scope of this lesson. But, you know, these are places today that are developing nations, which means there's a huge amount of poverty there. Corporations around the world, if they think the place is stable enough, they will put investments in these places. But the stablest of them all today is India. And that is why India today will get a lot of investment from the West. Okay, there will be a lot of corporations at work there. And remember that one of the byproducts of Britain's imperialism in India is not only that there's a lot of English speakers there, so they can readily adapt to Western corporations and speaking English, but you know, Britain left, but all the infrastructure Britain had built when India was its colony remained. And so India is going to have railroads, and it's going to have modern roads, and it's going to have like water reclamation projects and dams and all kinds of stuff that Britain's going to leave when it leaves. So it's going to be something for India to build on. And so for this region of the world, India itself is economically superior and more stable than these other places. And part of the problem with like Pakistan today is because of its strict Islamic legal system, it's going to struggle with things like women's rights, our modern sense of women's rights there today, and women in the workforce and things like that. And that's going to limit Pakistan's economic growth going forward. In terms of relationships with the West, it's even more complicated because today, the United States and European powers has a very strong economic tie to India, right? My brother, for example, works for a corporation known as Northrop Grumman, and it's an engineering corporation. And many of the people that work there are Indian engineers, okay? So that gives you an idea of example of what I'm talking about, right? But meanwhile, the United States has used Pakistan as a military base in its operations against terrorism in the Middle East and in places like Afghanistan. So Pakistan has a closer military relationship to the United States, even though it's definitely rocky, whereas India has a closer economic relationship with the United States today. So this kind of gives you a sense that there's globalization going on. There are multinational corporations, but they pick and choose. And a lot of Western corporations like to use Bangladesh, which used to be East Pakistan, because of the cheap labor that's there, okay? But meanwhile, during the Cold War, India was not aligned with the Soviets or the United States. It developed a nuclear weapon system, but then later on, so did Pakistan. So today, India and Pakistan bitterly hate each other, and they have nuclear weapons pointed at each other. And this hatred is born out of religious differences. You know, and to the north, there's an area known as Kashmir that they've fought over several times. And so that's a very, very tense relationship today that still exists, and it is a nuclear one, potentially. As we scroll down here, you can see a photo that I embedded here from Life magazine showing you, and when I talk about the violence that happened in 1947 when the partition took effect, I'm not kidding. And this video, I want you to take a break and watch this video that gives eyewitness accounts of the partitioning in 1947. You know, British soldiers that were there to watch this happen, Indian, both Muslim and Hindu witnesses to what was happening there. You know, it's like a 10-minute video that gives you a good sense of that. And then, of course, you've got India today from outer space, and you get a look at this highlighted, like from outer space, you can see the border between India and Pakistan is lit because it is a guarded border. Just like the 38th parallel between North and South Korea is guarded constantly. India and Pakistan's border is guarded constantly because of the animosity between the two groups. But in these other videos, or not videos, excuse me, these other photos, you see, you know, the effect that globalization has had on India and creating a modern state there today. And you can see, you know, there are modern cities there, multinational corporations that have invested there. You look at McDonald's, and I find that's really interesting because, you know, you don't eat cows in India, right? So you gotta modify the menu if you're McDonald's, and if you want to be a multinational corporation that like operates out of India, you gotta adapt. And globalization has made that increasingly easier to do. And of course, all of these places employ people there. And then this final video is with regards to an incident that happened this past year. The Prime Minister of India had made a statement that it would essentially give an opportunity for refugees to stay in India or from other countries that needed a place to go, but did not include Muslims. And so the Muslim population got very angry about this. And then it touched off violent incidents in the streets between Muslims and Hindus over this newly adopted government policy by the Prime Minister of India today. And so this video is footage from The Guardian, which is a newspaper entity in England, who took video footage of the rioting and stuff that happened as a result of this new policy by the Indian government. And this happened this past February. I mean, before all this coronavirus stuff, so it kind of gets lost in all the world events that have happened since then. But we're talking literally, this was just a couple of months ago. So take a look at that video and then respond to the prompt in your journals. Analyze the effects of decolonization of modern India. Where has it seen success and where does it still struggle? So I would like you to answer that. And remember, you're holding on to it until I collect the journals as a whole later on. So thanks, grasshoppers, and I'll see you again when I teach you guys about Africa and decolonization there.